Hello, I'm Renzo and welcome to my poster PNS Optimized Pulses for EPI POPE, Simple Adjustment to Gradient Pulse Shape for Practical High-Resolution fMRI. And I have no financial interest to disclose with respect to this presentation, though I will say that this is a close collaboration with Siemens Healthineer Dominik Rattenbacher. This work was triggered by our upgrade from the 70 Tera to the Tera X scanner, which is a scanner that is designed as a clinical scanner with these bulky body gradients for general clinical applicability. So just like an ambulance that needs to be bulky to fit in the patients. At the same time, though, this Tera X scanner has these awesome gradient amplifiers, allowing us to go to 250, which makes me feel like driving an ambulance on a racetrack. It feels kind of awkward, and as soon as you really push it, you are reminded by the safety police that it's not really built to be extremely fast. Specifically for EPI, as soon as you get close to these slew rates, you are limited by peripheral nerve stimulation watchdogs, and you cannot execute this protocol. So in this abstract, we are trying to deal with this specifically for high-resolution EPI. And in order to explain how we do this, I would like to show you this little cartoon model over here, where we have a gradient that goes from gradient strength number 1, then it's loose and goes to gradient strength number 2. And it doesn't really matter if it's loose from 0 to 40 or from minus 40 to 0, or if there's a sign difference over here. The important thing is that we have a slew rate that looks something like that, usually like a boxcar function for these linear slews. Now, the predicted PNS, according to the SAFE model that is used in these watchdogs, is basically a low-pass filtered version of that. And after about 300 microseconds, bam, you're exceeding your PNS threshold and you cannot execute this protocol. So the important message from looking at it like this is that there are different epochs during your slew. There's this early epoch where we are not really PNS limited. We are more hardware limited. We could slew further and faster if the hardware would allow it. But then later, we are more PNS limited. We are not really hardware limited. So given that there are these different stages of being hardware limited versus PNS limited, it might make sense to go away from this linear slew to a bilinear slew, where we basically slew up as fast as the hardware allows until we are at 99% of our predicted PNS, and then we only continue at a more moderate slew that allows us to keep the predicted PNS at a steady state level. So going back and forth again here, so we go away from this low pass filtered inverse exponential curve here to something that rises very fast and then is more stable and stays at this steady state. So when you look at this bimodal slew, this L function here, you can take this and repeat this over and over again until it looks like something like EPI. It's not like the regular EPI that has constant slews, because now these lobes are a bit tilted, asymmetric in time. And the difference between those two protocols is that the right one, the POPE, is executable at the scanner as opposed to the conventional EPI that has these very sparse spikes where you exceed your PNS threshold. And that's a frustrating part, namely that these sparse spikes where you exceed the PNS threshold are maybe at 5 to 10% of your sequence, but still you cannot execute 100% of the sequence. And in order to make it executable, you need to degrade your protocol for 100% of the sequence in order to make it executable at the scanner. In POPE, however, we are only slowing down the slew rate when we are actually limited by PNS. And from our simulation study, we find that at the conventional software of the Tera X scanners, you can slew at the maximum slew rate for about 250 microseconds until you're hitting your PNS threshold, and then you can continue to slew at about 130 slew rate. Now, with this new SPO4 software that will be released shortly for the Tera X, you can slow a bit longer for about 300 microseconds, and then you can also have additionally a higher steady state in there. And those parameters can then be used to optimize your protocol and your EPI pulses. So with this, now we can try to push fMRI resolution to 0.3 millimeter isotropic. And there are a couple of advanced acquisition methods that we need to use to get there. First of all, we need to use the participant-specific auto-align from Paul Wheaton that allows us to really capture the same tiny field of view of 20 slices here. This is particularly helpful because we have some non-linear motion of the brain kind of moving within the skull. On top of that, we use artifact mitigation strategies in the post-processing, the LN2 Frisco approach to deal with those kind of artifacts as presented at a different talk at this conference. We use the ISMRM coil, which is the best RF coil that I ever worked with for fMRI. On top of that, we really benefit from this new development from Ali Aghaifar from Siemens, this B0 shim whip that in our experience works much better than the conventional way of doing the 3D shimming. We use Rüdiger Stirnberg's 3D Kippi sequence. We disconnect a third of the shim in order to mitigate interactions between the gradient and the shims, leaving us with the remaining challenge of just having a lot of gradient heating. So within about maybe 8-10 minutes, we are heating up the gradient to the regime where there's a lot of wear and tear. So we only have short activation blocks, and then we usually need to wait like 4, 5, 6 minutes in order for the gradient to cool down again so we can start with the next scan. The kind of data that we are getting are noisy. It's very high resolution. So we acquire multiple averages, and then we average those runs on a TR by TR basis, which already gives us nice features. For example, you see the layers or the individual vessels here. We have TSNR values in the lower double-digit regime, allowing us to see activation changes for block design checkerboard tasks here. And as you can see here, there's a lot to be seen. It's a huge mess across different spatial scales. There are a lot of fine scale details that you can tease apart here. For example, you do see that within gray matter, it's not just one blob, you have these multiple layers here. For example, you have this stripe in the center, the middle feed forward layer, but on top of that, you also have the superficial and the deeper feedback layers. However, you see that it's not just like the layers following the cortical ribbon. There's a lot of variance there. We have these kind of blobs, sometimes aligned in columnar fashion. There's variance along the cortical ribbon, for example, that's different than the middle and the superficial layer. The deeper layer is kind of sparse, but then we also have things like those guys here that are kind of between the middle and the deepest layers. And at these resolutions, we can actually try to make sense of those data, as you can basically directly see these dark spots in the native EPI data as they're following through the cortical ribbon. So here we have a ascending vein, and you can see how this vein is basically following the activity across the cortical ribbon. Here we have another one where you can kind of see how this activity follows across the cortical depth. On top of that, you see the huge variance of activation changes above the cortex, these pile biases that sometimes seem to be positive and sometimes negative. There's a lot of dipole-dipole interaction of multiple veins, but then also these arterial effects, which is something that is shown by Alessandra Pizzuti at this very conference. She looked at these negative voxels, she traced them back to find that they are connected to the big arterial vessels at the brainstem, finding that there's something like a vasocontamination in these bold images, which is kind of ironic. We do find that these kind of features are very consistent across participants. We see multiple kind of stripes across cortical depth. We have these bimodal dot patterns, as well as these negative voxels there as well. Similarly, this works just as well in the primary motor cortex here for a finger tapping experiment, which allows you also to appreciate the different spatial scales. So we have these kind of big vessels in the range of centimeters, the leptomeningeal vessels in the range of millimeters, all the way to the pile vessels in the range of a few hundred micrometers, until you get to these kind of diving veins, these little stripy patterns over here that I find pretty exciting. And only the weakest responses that we're getting are then ultimately showing you these indications of these different layers, like here, for example, in the sensory cortex or also in the motor cortex, these stripes. And this is, of course, in 3D EPI, so you can look at this completely in 3D. And because it's in EPI, you can also nicely take these data and invert the contrast. So in EPI, vessels are dark. And if you invert that contrast, vessels are bright. So with those kind of EPI data, you can easily pump this through a segmentation algorithm, for example, from Chiara Mauri, and then basically trace back these vessels where the activation comes from down to the either arteries or big veins. Specifically, as you can see, that a lot of this activity is following the specific vessels. Another application of POPE would be to jump beyond the forbidden frequency for conventional submillimeter fMRI. Specifically with these body gradients, we have these mechanical resonances, and usually with matrix sizes in the range of 0.8 to 1 millimeter resolutions, we are limited by this band over here in the range of echo spacings of 1 millisecond. Now, with these new amplifiers, we would technically have the chance to jump on the other side of this forbidden frequency to have echo spacings that are shorter than 1 milliseconds. However, due to PNS with these bulky body grains, we are without POPE restricted to the other side. With POPE, however, now we can make this PNS go away and jump on the other side to have whole brain 0.9 millimeter resolution isotropic at echo spacings of 0.72 milliseconds here. So a small improvement of POPE together with this new SPO4 safe model allows us to have a huge boost in gradient performance. So you can get these layer profiles now with event-related designs of sub-millimeter data. With respect to future directions, we looked into potential regrading and eddy current effects and don't see any of those. Specifically with and without popes, the ghost level is completely unaltered, which however needs to be noted that this was all tested for sub-millimeter protocols, where we spend a lot of time on these flat tops of the gradients. So we will do further investigations with different kind of gradient shapes, specifically for low resolution protocols, and before this can now be released as part of the DZNA 3D EPI sequence. Of course, there are also other approaches to deal with PNS. Specifically, also there's a lot of different anecdotal strategies ranging from changing your head position and to different body types, as well as wearing bracelets or drinking electrolytes. And with this, I thank all my colleagues and I thank you for your attention.